Good morning. Good morning,
Good
everybody.
morning.
Good morning, Beatrice. Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to another live session. Just making sure everything is working fine. Hopefully you can hear and see us. Beatrice, you can hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Fantastic. Okay, perfect. Maybe you can let us know in the comments if you hear us okay and if everything is good. Um, for those who are having the um, auto comments or auto captions come up, so the text at the bottom, the subtitles. Uh, um, it can be a little bit annoying. There's the CC button that you will see at the bottom right hand corner, so you can actually press that to stop the text coming. It's something auto generated from LinkedIn, so it's not always accurate depending on how great our accents and pronunciation is. I'm sure Beatrice is much better than me at that for sure.
No, I wanted to say yours is perfect, but
So, good morning. Okay, it looks like we've even got a good evening from Melbourne. So yeah, let us know where you're watching in from. Hope everybody is ready to go for this live session. Um, just to kind of introduce a little bit, we have some different live sessions that we do from We Recruit. All of it can be found on our YouTube channel. I'm actually just going to put that in the comments as well, so you can find either the full session afterwards or the other bits of content that we do as well. We have our Ask a Recruiter series. We have the LinkedIn Live series like I'm doing today with Beatrice. We also have our Swiss recruitment journeys where we interview successful leaders in recruitment in Switzerland about their journey, how they made it, and of course the coffee with Cutter as well. So the link is in the comments. Please go over there, check out the YouTube channel, and do us a favor for those who are not subscribed, which is probably everyone. Please subscribe, because our goal is also that we can broadcast on LinkedIn and YouTube at the same time to reach a wider audience, to engage with a wider audience. So would really appreciate if you would head over to YouTube and click the subscribe button. On my side, I think most of you know me, Lee Diamond, the owner of We Recruit in Zurich, Switzerland, the Rectorec experts for the Swiss market. I don't think I need to say more, but I would like to introduce Beatrice. Beatrice Kohler, my guest today. It's not the first time she's been with us, and I think who better to introduce Beatrice than herself. So let me hand the word over to you, Beatrice.
yes, thank you, Lee, and thanks for having me again. My pleasure. Last time you were in the garden, I'm in front of the same background, but there we
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
My name is
excellent.
Beatrice. I'm responsible for the pontoon business in Europe, and I've been in the recruitment industry for over a decade. I actually started as a recruitment assistant and then moved to solutions, recruitment, outsourcing, and MSPs, the topic that we discussed today. And about a year ago, I took the role that I have today with the teams in Europe for our services. On a personal level, I live in Zurich with my partner of 13 years. We are both tennis enthusiasts. We enjoy playing and watching tennis. I sing in a choir, and the background is not fake, so I like to read a book once in a while. That's maybe the
Okay.
summary for myself.
Fantastic. Okay, I learned something new. I didn't know you sing in a choir, which, because there's normally different levels, right, of singers. What is yours?
Yeah, so I'm a mezzo soprano. We
Okay.
sing in a choir with the four general voices that you have.
Fantastic.
Every year there's a different program: classic, pop, jazz, basically good mix.
Very cool. I look forward to my invitation
I'll
to your
invite
next
you to the next concert.
one. Exactly. Fantastic. Okay. Good morning. I'm just seeing some comments come in. So good morning, Damien, Panos, Sally, Sebastian, Lucas, Camilla, Peter, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Looking forward to today's session. Good morning, Christoph, Simon, everybody who's here. So today's topic, as Beatrice mentioned, is about MSPs. You'd be surprised how often I actually get asked what an MSP is, or when I'm explaining about MSPs, and when I ask the question to recruiters and people in HR and talent acquisition. So I wanted to take this opportunity to have a live session together with Beatrice, the expert on everything MSP, to go through some of the basics, but also to go in a little bit deeper about what is an MSP, how does it work. We'll be answering these things. Of course, like always, it's a live session. So ideally, we'd much rather answer your questions than some of the questions we have prepared. So please feel free to add your questions. Let us know what you'd like to know. Share your opinions and comments also, which we'll bring in. And otherwise, we will roll with the questions that we've already prepared a bit ahead of time. So yeah, let's get it started. You ready?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. So the first question, the most obvious question, MSP, it stands for Managed Service Partner or Provider. But what is an MSP?
Right. So it can take all levels of complexity, but I give you the baseline explanation of what it is. An MSP, a managed service provider or a managed service program, is basically a way to help companies attracting and retaining external talent. Sometimes you also hear contingent workforce as a terminology, but generally it's everyone who is not on a company's payroll or has a contract with the company that is using their talent. So it can be temporary workers, independent contractors, or even service provider staff. And we can say more about later on. So it's really a service to make sure that companies who need people to help their existing workforce augment, bring in certain skills, certain capabilities, and make sure that the companies who provide these individuals can, create all of the administrative work that is connected to it.
Okay, so all about the contract, contingent, temporary workforce for an organization, basically.
Exactly.
And it's the management of that. So, okay, so let's talk about what are some of the different types of MSPs?
Yeah, so I'll start with the very classic one that has been, on the market for probably 10, 12, 15 years. That's what we call a neutral vendor MSP. Okay. What that means is that a company, let's take an example as it exists in Switzerland, a bank or a life science company is working with agencies, suppliers, so companies that supply this talent. And what they do is create a marketplace, if you like, where these companies can bid on open roles, whether it's software engineers, operators, or basically any role that the company might need in a competitive fashion. So there's rules of engagement for all of the suppliers. They're the same for all of them. Sometimes we see companies work with preferred supplier lists or tierings, meaning that somebody has preference or a group of people has preference over another one. But generally, the idea is that everybody has the same rules and the same chance to place a role with the end client. That's the one that is most prevalent in Switzerland, and I would say continental Europe in general.
So basically bringing I guess ideally the leading and best recruitment providers to compete against each other, supplying the best contract temporary talent to the companies and kind of managing that in a way. That's the most traditional one that we see, basically.
Absolutely. And I think here to complete, and those who have had any touch point with an MSP will know, this is usually governed by a tool called VMS. That's short for Vendor Management System. Just to give some names of the most well-known VMSs, Beeline, SAP, Fieldglass, some smaller ones that we know in Switzerland, Equipe, Pixid or Native are tools that you might have heard about. So these are basically the tools that really help from establishing the request, the role requirement, to collecting the CVs, to bringing them to the hiring managers, arrange for interviews, and then also create an assignment, which is basically the mission of the external person, and all the other administrative fun things like compliance, background checks, timesheets and invoices, and so on.
You said fun things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We all recruiters love compliance and administrative tasks and all of these things. So ultimately, the VMS is the CRM, as I guess, of the MSP, basically. So does many of this, I guess, of the same things, but also then managing the compliance, the raising of a headcount, approval of a headcount, and the different processes up to contract production and things like that, I guess, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
So that would be the most common and most frequent type of MSP. And I think we can mention two more that are quite important on the market. So one type of MSP service is direct sourcing.
Okay.
And again, depending on the country, this will mean different things. In the UK, and we have people from Australia, I saw Switzerland, but the general idea is that in addition to managing a supply chain, the MSP provider is tasked with directly sourcing people. Usually that happens with using the brand of the client and mostly also using some type of technology on their side. So whether it's their ATS or CRM, but the idea is that if we do this, I give a fictitious example. For Google, we'll go to market as Google and attract external talent with that brand. But the person will always remain external, so they will be payrolled by a third party.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we were talking about as well. I think in what I was quite surprised to hear in other countries, I think we were talking about the US as well. It can be at times that the kind of 95% of the MSP is actually delivered on by this kind of direct sourcing business model. I guess for a company like Google, as you kind of mentioned, it can be probably most of the time more attractive for a IT talent if they're approached by Google as opposed to being approached by an agency. So that could be a great kind of form and method for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the considerations. And I mean, it's true that the UK is the market where direct sourcing is basically the general standard thing. The neutral vent MSP is more rare in that market, or the US as well, or generally the Anglo-Saxon countries. But there's always a question of, if it's very niche, does it make sense to, task only one entity with a role? You have a certain risk, if that provider can't deliver, what do you do? On the other hand, if it's more repeatable, let's say standard, more commoditized roles, then direct sourcing can make sense. But that's probably true for all of the services. Not everything makes sense all the time. So most of the MSP services are tailored to the client's specific needs. And but direct sourcing is certainly something that on the continent in Europe is coming up more frequently, but it's not the norm yet.
Yeah. Okay. And you said there was a second one or a third one. What's the last one?
So all of what we discussed so far is usually applied to temporary workers and independent contractors. And the third piece that we can stress is everything to do with service procurement, or sometimes you hear SOW, that's short for statement of work. And there we are really on the level of buying services for a company, whether it's development of software, whether it's facility management, or generally large services that the company buys for themselves. That would be something that is often managed in a neutral vendor way. But there's really a difference between bringing in individual resources like we described it, or buying larger type services for companies.
Okay, so would this be, as I understand it, if we talk about the Swiss market, I see there's consulting companies out there, like maybe an Altran would be a big name, for example. So does that mean that you would engage with these consulting companies to do that as the MSP? Or did I understand that right?
Yeah, exactly. So let's take two very common examples for the service procurement or SOW piece. One is really IT, so larger scale projects where the company is not hiring an individual software developer to help with some code, but they say, this is the mobile app, for example, that we want to develop, and they hand this over to a single provider. That's a very common example. Or then everything to do with maintenance facilities. So if ISS, for example, is taking over the maintenance, the cleaning of offices, that would be a typical service, but in the SOW module. And I think the main difference, if you think of it from the MSP perspective, is that in the first area, you're more a recruiter type person. You will work with the suppliers to bring in good talent. You might do a pre-selection. You help with the admin piece. And in the SOW space, people more often have actually a buying or a procurement background, category management, for example, because you're opening large RFPs and companies are responding to it. So the type of activities are different.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so then when does a company know that they need an MSP? Is it based on the size of the company, complexity? I mean, I assume there needs to be a certain size for it to be interesting as an organization to implement it anyway. But yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, exactly. So usually you have like a matrix of components, and if multiple of these apply, then an MSP can be interesting. One, like you said, is size. In Switzerland, we typically say if you have a full-scale MSP with a VMS at the whole shebang, then it does not often make sense to do that for less than 100 permanent external heads or 10 million annual spend on these profiles. That's really a rough estimation. It can work. We do have had clients with smaller scope, and they just said, well, we still want like the premium solution for this. It's possible, but often a simpler service is more adapt to these companies. Then what I would highlight is the type of worker. So if it's a company that has 100% or 90% blue collar workers, often it is also not something that is very helpful, because in these areas, you're in the low margin, high volume business. And these companies typically don't have a large supply chain where it's actually needed to have somebody in between to help manage this supply chain. So that means by changing it around, if the company has a certain amount of white collar and a mix with blue collar, that's fine. But very often MSPs are used in white collar spaces. And the third piece that it's important, if the supply chain is large, so anything, double digit up to, we have, clients with 100 and more suppliers attached to this marketplace, then it makes sense, because then you really have a mass and a supply chain where a competition element makes sense. So if you're a company that only has 2 preferred suppliers and maybe 2 that cover niche roles, there's a question whether it is really needed to have an MSP.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like a big part of it is around the size, but also about the speciality of kind of white collar recruitment and the amount of supplies that you have as well. Exactly. So I think the next question I wanted to ask was kind of, when should a company not move to an MSP? But I think you somehow within that as well anyway kind of answered the question there. So we can move on to the next one. Just to remind you as well, please feel free to add your questions in. We'd love to know what you would like to know about the MSPs and the workings and so. So in the meantime, let's talk about some of the challenges. I mean, I've seen and painfully experienced an MSP, or having a client as a recruiter that kind of transition towards an MSP. I think they are extremely complex. There's a lot of challenges involved. Tell us about that. What's some of the challenges when you're implementing MSP?
Yeah, I would say some of the challenges arrive before you actually reach a decision as a company to implement one. And it's true. I mean, we actually got to know each other as part of a transition. And I mean, we still speak to each other. So I think that's maybe the clue here. It is a process, because it's not an MSP, and we're trying to explain that, right, with the questions that we're responding to. It's not a simple one-off transaction. It really is usually a long-term program. I mean, most MSP providers, us included, work with companies 3, 5, 10 years on these programs. So it takes a bit of time to really get into the structure. And I think the challenge from a company perspective at the beginning is to get the alignment of the different stakeholders. Because if you think of it, you have procurement that are usually interested in the supply chain questions. You have HR that are looking at external talent as part of their talent remit. You often have finance because, the whole invoicing piece is centralized in an MSP. And you have other stakeholders in the business that have an interest. And often companies come from a very decentralized model. And with any initiative that tries to centralize and harmonize, you have questions. Not everybody's happy. People are asking, why should I contribute, and so on. So I think the alignment.
The managers are worried about making sure they're
Right,
still
where you take away the contact.
they have relationships as well. Yeah.
Exactly. So I would say the buy-in and really the strategic piece of we're going to do that as an organization is the most tricky piece. Once that is done, what we often see is that in the process of implementing, for example, the VMS, there can be complexities because you thought, well, we'll just buy a standard process, but then all of a sudden compliance tells you, no, you need another approval step, along the way. So I would say the technology implementation is a challenge. And because it's large projects, as with any, you start at some point, and by the time you finally implement it, sometimes you find the end result is different from what people imagined when the deal was sold. So these would be things really from a company and MSP perspective. For the suppliers, and you can say more because you have the experience as well. I think the change management can be tricky because sometimes the interpretation of an MSP is somebody comes in who blocks my direct approach or my direct report with the line managers. And, from the many MSPs that I have been part of, there are programs where the client is really strict in saying, we bring in the MSP exactly, to stop the individual activities, but there are others who are really good about it, who say we need the suppliers to be knowledgeable about our business, and that must include a connection with the suppliers and the hiring managers. So, but that is probably always the most difficult one, because you come as a supplier from often direct relationships that is afterwards a bit managed with rules of engagement. But the advantage on the other side is as well, sometimes as a supplier, you are very well positioned in one business unit, but not in the other. And the MSP's tasks has to be to bring more business to the suppliers, because otherwise, how can it be interesting for an agency to be part of the model? And, sometimes it's not enough to just say the client wants it, deal with it. That is not a good partnership aspect.
Yeah, no, I think it's, anything when it comes to change with people, especially when you talk about the recruiters. So, talk about from my point of view, of course, there are, such big implications from the relationships I have with the managers. At times at the beginning, maybe I'm working on the positions exclusively because I'm so close with the manager, or perhaps only have one or two competitors, to having a much larger competitor pool, but also because there's a financial impact for the recruitment companies, and even down to the recruiter themselves. Recruiters are paid on a bonus structure of how many placements I make. If there's anything that comes in that can kind of have an impact on that, if I perceive it to be negatively, there's gonna be a lot of resistance, let's say. I think there's definitely that element though of being able to deliver on a lot more. And ultimately, it's the way that the contract contingent recruitment for large organizations has been developing and is going, globally for the last kind of 10 plus years. So, I think Switzerland has been very behind on that. But I think if you looked at, and we'll come to this next question after, but if you look at the trends and the way that things go within recruitment, Switzerland is often one of the last to adopt many different business models and solutions. And if you look at the rest of the world, these already exist and have already happened. So I think it's about, how can you adapt and pivot and change the structure of your business model to best suit this new solution, basically.
No, agree. And I think that's probably a big consideration and a recommendation we make to any organization who moves to an MSP program. Transparency for the suppliers is really important. They need to know, are they up against, I don't know how many suppliers in a certain category. They need to know what is expected of them and what they can expect in turn. And if that is not given, then it's very difficult. And I would say maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, that was less of a consideration. And it was more of, we're centralizing, we're harmonizing, we're getting a grip on the cost. Whereas today, it's such a candidate-driven market. And so I think the behaviors and the way MSPs have to engage with suppliers is different today, because if you're not in a direct sourcing model, then you're completely dependent on the supplier's performance and willingness and contribution to make the program a success. So that's why it's such a symbiotic relationship and should be treated as such.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So we actually have a question come in from Camilla. Let me bring this up. So Camilla is asking, can they only run an MSP with a VMS? Is there another solution or, yeah?
Well, the short answer is yes, otherwise it's going to be complicated. In any case, it is true that for smaller programs, sometimes we see that we're not using a VMS, we're using some other type of technology, sometimes to help, let's say, with the contract aspect or with the time sheeting. I think if you do the classic process, the challenge without a tool, let's say, it doesn't have to be a VMS, is that it's very hard to track and get the visibility, which is one of the key aspects why companies want a VMS. And there's data protection aspects. I mean, how do you track the CVs and so on if they are not in a tool? So, I mean, if ever we can avoid it to not work with a proper tool, we will. So we don't recommend companies to go without. But sometimes if it's smaller programs, it makes sense to not implement an enterprise level VMS like Beeline or Fieldglass. That's certainly true.
Yeah, thanks for that, and thanks Camilla for the question. I think it's clear. Like one of the big benefits, as I see it, from an MSP and using a VMS is also the data that you collect, the information that you can look at. What's your spend? You know, how is that across the board? Is it all compliant? You know, there's a lot of elements there. So I think that's interesting, and yeah, I can imagine it'd be challenging without VMS. So yeah, okay, good. So trends. What, you know, as I say, Switzerland's a little bit behind. You know, what are you seeing from outside of Switzerland? What are some of the global trends, things happening in the MSP world?
Yeah, so I think what we've discussed so far are basically the baseline elements, and we talked about the more transactional, operational elements. In terms of trends, I think two things to highlight. So one is really everything to do with integrating the channels to talent. So companies who have worked with MSPs previously, or maybe some that haven't, but look at the topic of talent a bit more holistically, they want to connect the contingent workforce with the more classic permanent workforce, whether it's like joint recruitment processes, whether it's technology that helps integrate the various tools. Because it's true today, we don't know a lot of technologies that cover like all of the talent categories in one. Most companies work with HRIS systems that then integrate with a VMS, with a CRM, with an ATS. So that's a big trend, to really look at the topic more holistically and not just say, well, permanent recruitment is HR, external workforce is procurement. And that's reflected in the technology and also the service offerings that we see. And the other piece that I would highlight is still the aspect of companies coming back to the topic and work more modular with providers. So again, 5, 6, 7 years ago, the topic contingent workforce was clearly something to outsource. Companies didn't perceive it as a piece of their core activities, and that's changing a lot. Also, if you look at some of the conferences on the topic, it used to be 95% procurement people, and today it's almost 50-50 HR procurement, because companies are thinking much more about what do we need to build, what do we need to buy, what do we need to rent in terms of talent. And I think that changes how companies select which activities they do in-house and which activities they outsource. So really the classic full-scale outsourcing of an MSP solution becomes a bit more rare in my perception.
Okay, so it could be that there's more, so it's not just exclusively to the contingent side, it could be that this kind of starts to also broaden to permanent and other solutions and kind of bringing everything together, basically.
Yeah, and I think companies are looking to get more advisory than they used to in previous years. So really an understanding of exactly what you're asking. What are the trends? What are some of the things that are working in the market? What are the risks to it? So I think the MSP's role is becoming a little less transactional, also because many providers can automate more tasks of what they do. So it's more of instructing companies how to structure it, how to approach it, and so on. That is certainly a trend.
Okay, good. So we have a question from Simon that's come in. He is asking how AI is impacting MSP in the future.
Vast question. So I can highlight two things that we already see. I think really in the operational transactional activities that we discussed, getting CVs and proposals from suppliers, do a pre-selection or a matching to the open roles at the client. There we see companies starting to think about, can we bring in a tool that helps with the matching, or do we really need somebody to look at each and every CV to sift through these? Because obviously there's also an aspect of the agencies know what they're doing. So there's more a question of, can we make it easier to actually find proactively mandates for existing external talent? That would be one thing. And maybe less artificial intelligence, but certainly automation, RPA, Simon, in the area of onboarding and background checks. So instead of having somebody collecting the documents like ID card, like a criminal record, and so on, that there's a certain degree of automation. If a company chooses to actually do that background check through the MSP, a lot of companies actually say, no, this is the supplier's responsibility. We'll just do audits. But that's probably another area where we see automation come in quite quickly.
Okay, thank you, and thanks, Simon, for the question. So let's talk about a company that we have here. So that's had an MSP for a decade. Do they tend to change? And what are some of the trends around a long-standing program?
Yeah, I would say so. Do they change providers? Is your question, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, do they change the provider? Do they change the solution? Is it kind of continuous?
Right. So I don't think I can say there's like the absolute pattern that always occurs in certain stages of an MSP's life. I would say, yes, there is an aspect of changing providers these days. If a company has had somebody who really took care of the transactional baseline activities that we discussed, but I wouldn't say it's a given. I mean, often relationships, like we said, stay on very long, and then it's more a question of moving to the next level. And we come back to what we just said before, the aspect of being more strategic, of being more purposeful about the external workforce. That is something that is developing. But there's also cases where a company says, we've worked with a provider very long, we're taking it back in-house. So there is no exact science to it. But I think what is clear is that companies are often a bit reluctant to change provider because it's quite a machinery that you bring into play once you have an MSP. So I would say it's less demanding, more advisory, demanding more strategic elements from a provider, rather than saying, let's see if somebody else can do it in the same fashion for maybe a lower price. That's less of an activity.
I think it's too complex, too painful to make such a change just to save a little bit of money. I think there really needs to be some massive offering or something that a new supplier could offer, for example, if they
agree. Or really a change of approach, going from neutral to something else, or vice versa. That is more often a change we see rather than changing provider.
Okay. So what does an MSP consultant do? I think it was even Simon, or I saw somebody post something saying that they're constantly asked what it is they do. What does a day in the life of a MSP consultant look like?
Yeah, so I mean, I saw in the chat we do have some, so they could probably answer a bit better than I can, but
Mhm.
I've been an MSP consultant in my previous life, so I still remember. But
Hmm.
I would say let's highlight three things again. One is really the advisory piece with your hiring managers, with your suppliers, so to make sure that they understand the program, the processes, the rules of engagement, and also the best practices and best behaviors. Because when we are in the space of temp workers and independent contractors, I would say the MSP consultants' work has a lot of overlap with the classic recruiters position, except for the sourcing piece. That's what is in the area of the suppliers. But really making sure that all the people who have a task in the process understand what's expected of them, and so on, is one piece. The other element is certainly working on the requisitions. So making sure that good profiles reach the hiring managers, making sure that they advance with the interviews, helping the supplier gather feedback if a profile is not accepted. So there again, quite a piece of recruitment activity. And the third piece, depending on how your role is structured, is dedicated to the more administrative compliance focused tasks. So whether it's an audit of certain aspects of the program or the contract management, that would be something typical an MSP consultant does.
Okay, good. Thank you. So we're slowly coming to the end of our questions. If anyone out there has some questions they would like us to ask, please to answer, please let us know. So, I mean, maybe one of the things we can also discuss a little bit is kind of how it works for agencies and kind of what some of the challenges are. Yeah, what do you see? What are the biggest challenges for agencies?
Yeah, if we look at what they do or what their task is in an MSP, the first one is probably positioning, making sure that you get accredited to an MSP. And I mean, either you're a long-standing partner and the client will decide to just associate you to the program, or if it's more outbound that you haven't worked with a company, they implement an MSP, then the piece you do first as an agency is the lobbying to get on the preferred supplier list or to make sure that you get entry into the program. That's the first step. And I mean, depending on how it's structured, that can be the first challenge. If you're new on the market or if you haven't dealt with a company but you want to, then obviously explaining what is it that you bring to the table as an agency. Either you pitch that to the MSP, if they are tasked and mandated with the PSL management, or what we see quite frequently in Switzerland is that the client keeps this responsibility with themselves.
Okay.
Then it's a question of how do you get to the decision makers to make sure you get into the program. That's maybe the first. And then as an agency, if you're accredited, then very often it's structured like this, that the roles are structured across job families. So different elements in IT, whether it's development or run or infrastructure, or you have compliance, you have HR, or these different families, and you're listed, and then you contribute to the process, right? You get a role, you get information on the requirements, you do sourcing, you submit your candidates, and then it's a question of following up, understanding do you have enough information to really deliver to it? Do you need anything else? And so on. And, work to the KPIs, the key performance indicators that MSPs usually define for suppliers, whether that's a certain response rate or a conversion rate from submission to interview to hire. So it's really making sure that you can deliver to the requisitions and you get the information to actually be, effective on these roles. And that too can be a challenge. I mean, depending on how good the competition is or how good the quality of information is that you get. That is probably something I would highlight for agencies to insist on. You can't perform well if you don't get the elements to do it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, must be one of the most competitive positions as in recruitment, to be working, delivering into an MSP, competing against the best recruitment companies, assuming obviously that's the makeup of the PSL, where there's very little or probably no advantage other than I've worked with the company for many years, so I have a good understanding of what they need. It's an extremely competitive and challenging position to be in, for sure.
I agree, and usually it's quite structured as well on the price side. Either there are rate cards, or some companies work with fixed markups or markup ranges. So I agree, and that's why I think for the agency it is really important to understand the business of the company as well. It's not just a question of I'll send in some and the business, objectives of a certain business unit. And here again, I mean, if it's an MSP program where the client wishes to structure the contact between line management and suppliers a little more, then the MSP has to facilitate that. They have to make sure that you understand the projects, the stakes in a given business unit, and that usually helps to deliver better profiles to the business.
Okay. Sounds good. Alrighty, then I think there was one thing you wanted to share as well. I have a link to a summit. Maybe you wanted to mention something about that. I'm going to share it into the comments. I think there's an event coming up, right?
Yeah. So there's an annual summit called CWS. That's short for Contingent Workforce Summit. This year, after 2 years of online conference, it's back live in London at the beginning of May. And whoever would like to go meet me there, I'll be present. But it's interesting if you want to go on the website with the link that you just posted, just to look at the agenda, because it gives you a bit of indications, just a few catch phrases on the trends, the topics that are quite en vogue at the moment. So that could be of interest for those who want to look around what is being discussed in the industry.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, Beatrice, thank you so much for joining me for a second time to help explain what an MSP is and some of the details and inner workings. Really helps recruiters and HR and TA understand a bit more about the workings of different solutions within recruitment. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
And then I wish everybody out there a wonderful sunny weekend, or it's sunny here in Zurich. Hopefully it's sunny where you are. Thanks again, Beatrice, for joining us. We see each other live and in real life soon. Thanks very much. And wishing you a weekend. Thanks so much, Beatrice.
Thank you very much, Lee. Speak soon.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Cheers.